They never expect it to come wrapped in silence, not fireworks, not announcements, just a quiet shift in the air when the calendar flips and the world pretends it's calm. Christmas Eve has a funny way of doing that, dressing itself in lights while rearranging destinies behind closed doors. Everyone's busy rehearsing traditions, replaying old stories, convincing themselves they already know how love works. And that's exactly when it slips through the cracks and rewrites the script. Love doesn't show up when people are waiting for it. Waiting is passive, polite, rehearsed. Waiting is sitting still and hoping the world feels generous. Readiness is different. Readiness is uncomfortable. It's built in silence, in decisions nobody applauded, in restraint that felt lonely at the time. Readiness is what happens when you stop asking when and start asking who you are becoming. People confuse the two because waiting feels innocent, but readiness feels dangerous. Like you might actually have to change. Love arrives when readiness replaces waiting, because readiness doesn't flinch. It doesn't negotiate with fear. It doesn't romanticize struggle or cling to illusions. It sharpens you. It strips you of fantasies about how things should look and forces you to accept how they are. That's why love feels sudden to outsiders. They think it came out of nowhere, when in reality it arrived right on time, at the exact moment you stopped needing it to save you. Readiness is built from endings people never saw, from walking away when saying would have been easier, from choosing solitude over noise, from learning how to sit with your own thoughts without numbing them. Love doesn't trust someone who is still waiting to be rescued. It responds to someone who can stand alone without bitterness, without desperation, without pretending they don't care. That kind of stability isn't soft. It's forged. And when it's ready, it doesn't announce itself. It recognizes its equal. People wait with expectation. They wait with lists, timelines, conditions, and hidden contracts. Readiness has none of that. It's flexible, alert, and grounded. It doesn't demand perfection. It demands honesty. When love meets readiness, there's no performance, no sales pitch, no audition. There's a quiet understanding that both people have already done the work separately, and now the work shifts into something shared. That's what shocks people. They expect drama, chaos, chasing, and confusion, and instead they witness clarity. Readiness also terrifies observers because it exposes their own delays. They waited for circumstances to change. You changed yourself. They waited for healing to arrive. You confronted your wounds directly. They waited for signs. You became the sign. Love doesn't reward patience the way fairy tales promise. It responds to alignment. It shows up when your actions, boundaries, and self-respect stop contradicting your words. That alignment is rare, and when it happens, it draws connection like gravity. Love arriving at readiness feels different because it doesn't destabilize you. It doesn't pull you away from yourself. It integrates. It adds instead of replaces. That's how you know it's real. Waiting love needs constant reassurance. Ready love doesn't. It's steady, observant, and deliberate. It doesn't rush, but it doesn't hesitate either. It recognizes opportunity and moves without panic. That calm movement unsettles people who learned love through chaos and confusion. Readiness also means you're no longer bargaining with the past. You're not trying to fix old stories by rewriting them with new characters. You're not projecting unfinished business onto someone innocent. Love senses that. It knows when it's being used as a distraction versus when it's being invited into a grounded life. That's why it arrives without warning. Because when readiness is complete, there's nothing left to negotiate. People say love is patient, but what they mean is they stayed still. Love isn't impressed by stillness. It responds to movement, growth, and self-awareness. Readiness is movement inward before it's movement outward. It's the courage to become whole without witnesses. When love finally arrives, it doesn't feel like luck. It feels inevitable, like two paths that we're always going to cross once the noise cleared. That's why your love story shocks the world. Not because it's loud, dramatic, or cinematic, but because it's clean. Because it doesn't beg approval. Because it didn't come from waiting rooms or wishful thinking, but from readiness built in quiet places where most people refuse to go. And when love meets that version of you, it doesn't ask for permission. It steps in, steady and unafraid, while everyone else is still wondering how it happened. So fast silence doesn't look like progress, and that's why people fear it. Noise feels productive. Noise feels alive. Noise gives the illusion that something is happening even when nothing is changing. Silence strips that illusion away. It removes the audience, the commentary, the distractions, and leaves you alone with yourself. Most people run from that moment because silence doesn't entertain, it interrogates. It asks questions you can't scroll past, questions you can't laugh away, questions that don't care how uncomfortable they make you. Silence prepares you by taking things away. It takes away validation. It takes away excuses. It takes away the comfort of being misunderstood on purpose. In silence, there's no one to impress and no one to blame. You either face what you are or you invent noise to avoid it. That's why silence builds something noise never can. Noise keeps you busy. Silence makes you honest. People think preparation looks like talk about plans, announcing growth, explaining pain, rehearsing futures. That's noise. Preparation happens when there's nothing to say because the work is internal. When you're alone long enough to notice your patterns. When you catch yourself lying to yourself and there's no one there to help you justify it. Silence doesn't let you escape your habits. It forces you to confront them without makeup, without filters, without applause. Noise rewards performance. Silence rewards alignment. In noise, you can be inconsistent and still feel important. In silence, inconsistency feels loud. Your thoughts echo. Your intentions expose themselves. You begin to notice where your actions don't match your words, where your confidence is borrowed, where your identity is built on reaction instead of choice. That awareness is painful, and that pain is the beginning of preparation. Silence also sharpens perception. When the volume drops, patterns emerge. You start seeing how people move, how situations repeat, how certain outcomes are predictable, because the behavior behind them never changes. Noise keeps you reactive. Silence makes you observant. It slows your impulse to respond and strengthens your ability to wait. And waiting, real waiting, not passive hoping, but controlled patience, changes how you move. When the moment finally arrives, most people avoid silence because it doesn't give immediate rewards. There's no applause for restraint, no recognition for self-control, no praise for not reacting. But silence trains discipline. It teaches you how to hold power without displaying it, how to endure discomfort without announcing it, how to grow without narrating every step. That's why when results appear, people think it happened overnight. They didn't see the quiet months where everything important was being built. Silence prepares emotional strength too. In noise, emotions are shared, amplified, validated, diluted. In silence, emotions are processed. You feel them fully without outsourcing them to others. You learn which feelings deserve action and which ones just want attention. That distinction changes everything. It keeps you from sabotaging progress with impulse. It keeps you from confusing intensity with truth. Silence teaches emotional literacy in a way no conversation ever could. There's also a danger in noise that people don't like to admit. Noise makes you predictable. When you talk too much, explain too much, react too quickly, people learn how to control you. Silence disrupts that. It creates uncertainty. It keeps your intentions protected. It allows you to move without being intercepted. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It means containment. And containment is power. Silence prepares confidence that doesn't need witnesses. The kind that doesn't shake when questioned. The kind that doesn't collapse when misunderstood. When you've spent time alone, refining your values, testing your beliefs, and surviving your doubts privately, external opinions lose their grip. Noise-trained confidence needs constant reinforcement. Silence-trained confidence stands on its own, quiet, steady, unbothered. That's why when the moment comes, when opportunity, love, confrontation, or change finally appears, the prepared ones move differently. They don't rush. They don't over-explain. They don't perform. They recognize the moment because silence taught them how to listen. Noise would have distracted them. Silence trained their attention, their restraint, their timing, their judgment. It shaped them in ways no external motivation ever could. Silence doesn't announce what it's doing. It works in the background, reshaping instincts, sharpening awareness, stripping away what doesn't belong. People only notice the result and call it luck, timing, coincidence. They never credit the quiet seasons because those seasons didn't make a sound. But everything solid, everything real, everything unshakable was built there in the absence of applause, in the absence of explanation, in the space where you learn to sit with yourself long enough to become someone new without telling anyone what you were becoming. Timing isn't loyal to tradition, calendars, or comfort. It doesn't care what day people agreed was special or sacred. It moves according to truth, readiness, and consequence. Traditions are rehearsals repeated until they feel safe, predictable, controllable. Truth disrupts that. Truth doesn't knock politely or wait for permission. It bends timing around itself, not the other way around. That's why when something real happens during a moment everyone thought they understood, it feels shocking, almost offensive. People trust tradition because it removes responsibility. If things don't change, they can blame timing, destiny, fate, or the calendar. Truth doesn't allow that escape. Truth shows up when it's supposed to, not when it's expected. It arrives when denial runs out of energy. It appears when pretending becomes exhausting. That's when timing shifts, not because the moment is convenient, but because reality finally has space to breathe. Tradition teaches people to wait for permission, to wait for the right season, the right sign, the right approval. Truth doesn't wait. It exposes. It confronts. It arrives exactly when avoidance has reached its limit. That's why people feel betrayed by timing when something real happens outside the script. They thought life followed rules they memorized. Truth shows them life responds to honesty, not rituals. Timing bows to truth because truth carries weight. It bends circumstances. It rearranges priorities. It disrupts habits that were never questioned. When truth enters a situation, timing accelerates or collapses instantly. What people thought would take years happens in moments. What they delayed for decades demands action now. That compression feels unfair to those who relied on tradition as a shield. They feel rushed, exposed, unprepared. Truth also strips nostalgia of its power. Traditions survive because people hide inside them. They repeat the same motions, same words, same expectations, hoping meaning will magically return. Truth doesn't care about nostalgia. It cares about alignment. When something true appears, it doesn't ask whether it fits the story people wanted. It asks whether it fits reality. If it does, timing adjusts to accommodate it, not the other way around. People say timing is everything, but what they mean is control. They want timing to be predictable, manageable, explainable. Truth destroys that illusion. Truth introduces inevitability. When it appears, it makes delays obvious, excuses fragile, and rituals hollow. That's why it feels disruptive. It forces decisions people hope to postpone. It demands presence instead of performance. Timing tied to truth feels ruthless because it removes bargaining. You can't negotiate with it. You can't reschedule it. You can't dress it up to make it more comfortable. It shows up when alignment happens, when internal readiness meets external opportunity. That intersection ignores tradition completely. It doesn't care if it's inconvenient, ironic, or socially awkward. It arrives anyway. Truth also rearranges power dynamics. Those who relied on tradition to maintain status feel threatened. When timing shifts around truth, authority moves. Influence changes hands. People who prepared quietly suddenly stand at the center, while those who depended on routine scramble to catch up. That reversal feels like chaos to observers, but it's actually correction. Tradition teaches people what to expect. Truth teaches them what is. Expectation dulls perception. Truth sharpens it. When truth enters, timing accelerates awareness. People suddenly see what was always there but never acknowledged. Relationships clarify. Intentions reveal themselves. Paths split. That clarity feels violent to those who preferred ambiguity. Timing bows to truth because truth removes friction. When something is aligned, it moves cleanly. When it's false, it drags. Traditions often preserve friction because they protect comfort. Truth dissolves it. That's why when something real happens, it feels fast, decisive, irreversible. People call it sudden, but it was building quietly beneath the surface. While everyone was distracted by ceremony, truth doesn't care about optics. It doesn't care how the story looks from the outside. It cares about coherence. When coherence appears, timing snaps into place. Pieces move. Doors open. Conversations happen. Choices become obvious. The shock people feel isn't because truth arrived too soon, but because they weren't paying attention when it was preparing. Timing never belonged to tradition. Tradition only borrowed it. Truth owns it. When truth steps forward, timing follows without hesitation. It doesn't apologize. It doesn't explain. It doesn't slow down for comfort. It moves with precision, exposing who is ready, who is pretending, and who mistook routine for meaning. And once timing has bowed, there's no going back to the script. People memorize to feel safe. Comfort zones aren't places of peace. They're padded rooms where potential goes to sleep. People decorate them with routines, familiar faces, predictable outcomes, and call it stability so they don't have to admit they're hiding. Comfort feels safe because it asks nothing of you. It doesn't demand growth, risk, or honesty. It lets you repeat yesterday without consequences. That's why real connection becomes disruptive the moment it appears. It doesn't fit inside the walls people carefully built to avoid being exposed. Real connection doesn't knock gently. It walks in and starts rearranging things. It questions habits you never examined. It challenges beliefs you inherited instead of chose. It interrupts patterns you mistook for personality. That disruption is uncomfortable because it forces awareness. Suddenly, you're not just existing, you're being seen. And being seen is dangerous for anyone who built their life around hiding in plain sight. People say they want connection, but what they really want is validation that doesn't cost them anything. They want to be affirmed without being confronted. Real connection doesn't offer that bargain. It brings friction. It exposes inconsistencies. It demands presence instead of performance. When two people connect authentically, comfort zones collapse because pretending becomes impossible. Masks slip. Scripts fail. What's left is raw and unfamiliar, and most people don't know how to stand there without retreating. Comfort zones thrive on predictability. Real connection introduces unpredictability. It brings curiosity instead of assumption. It invites depth instead of surface-level exchange. It requires listening instead of waiting to speak. That shift feels threatening to anyone who built their identity on being unchallenged. When connection is real, you can't rely on habits to carry you through. You have to show up consciously, and that effort exposes how asleep you were before disruption is necessary because comfort zones breed stagnation. People stay the same for years and call it loyalty to self. They repeat the same mistakes and call it consistency. Real connection interrupts that loop. It reflects back parts of you that haven't evolved, not to shame you, but to wake you up. That reflection feels sharp. It cuts through narratives you use to protect yourself from growth. And when those narratives fall apart, people panic. Real connection doesn't soothe ego, it challenges it. It doesn't reassure insecurity, it highlights it. That's why people resist it while claiming to crave it. Comfort zones allow you to control how you're perceived. Real connection removes that control. It introduces mutual vulnerability, shared risk, and honest feedback. You can't curate yourself when someone sees beyond the presentation. That loss of control feels like danger to those who depend on it. When comfort collapses, excuses lose power. You can't blame timing, circumstances, or other people when connection reveals what you've been avoiding. Real connection shows you where you settled, where you compromised, where you stopped asking hard questions. That exposure is unsettling because it removes the safety net of denial. People retreat not because connection hurt them, but because it demanded more than they were willing to give. Comfort zones are silent agreements to not disturb each other. Real connection breaks that agreement. It asks for honesty even when it's inconvenient. It invites growth even when it's uncomfortable. It refuses to participate in mutual avoidance. That refusal feels aggressive to people who confuse peace with numbness. They interpret disruption as threat because they've never learned the difference between safety and stagnation. Real connection also redefines standards. Once you experience it, surface-level interactions feel empty. Small talk feels loud. Pretending feels exhausting. That shift isolates you from environments built on comfort alone. And that isolation scares people because it forces them to choose between familiarity and authenticity. Many choose familiarity and resent those who didn't. Comfort zones collapse when truth enters the room. Real connection carries truth naturally without forcing it. It shows what's possible when people stop hiding behind routines and roles. That possibility is threatening because it raises the bar. It exposes how much effort real intimacy requires and how little effort people have been giving. Instead of rising to meet it, many try to dismiss it, ridicule it, or sabotage it. Disruption isn't destruction, but to those invested in comfort, it feels the same. Real connection doesn't destroy who you are, it dismantles who you pretended to be. It removes the padding, the noise, the distractions. What remains is something sharper, more honest, more alive. That aliveness feels overwhelming to people who trained themselves to feel as little as possible. Comfort zones promise peace, but deliver numbness. Real connection delivers intensity, clarity, and growth. It demands participation instead of observation. That demand is why it shocks people, not because it's dramatic, but because it refuses to shrink itself to fit spaces built for avoidance. When real connection appears, comfort zones don't adapt, they crack. And in that cracking, people are forced to decide whether they want to stay safe or become. Real people love the word coincidence because it protects them from responsibility. Coincidence sounds harmless, random, polite. It lets them believe outcomes happen without effort, that results just fall from the sky and land on lucky people. Preparation ruins that fantasy. Preparation is uncomfortable, lonely, repetitive, and invisible. No one applauds it. No one notices it. And when it finally shows itself through results, people panic because admitting preparation exists means admitting they didn't do what they call it coincidence, when timing lines up too perfectly, when something works out too cleanly, when someone steps into a moment and doesn't hesitate. What they're really seeing is hours stacked on hours, choices stacked on sacrifices, discipline stacked on discomfort. Preparation doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need witnesses. It's built when nobody is watching, when there's no guarantee it will ever pay off. That's why it looks like magic to people who only move when they're. As proof, coincidence is a word used by observers who arrived late. They didn't see the isolation, the repetition, the failures that taught precision. They didn't see the restraint it took to say no when saying yes would have been easier. They didn't see the boredom of consistency, the frustration of slow progress, the discipline of showing up when motivation disappeared. All they see is the moment it works, and their brains scramble for an explanation that doesn't implicate their own inaction. Preparation builds familiarity with pressure. That's why it looks calm under chaos. People think calm means luck, or talent, or divine favoritism. They don't understand that calm comes from rehearsal, from facing discomfort so many times that it loses its shock value, from failing privately until mistakes stop being emotional and start being informational. When preparation meets opportunity, the reaction is smooth, almost casual. And that ease offends people who expect struggle. To always look dramatic, coincidence feels safer than acknowledging preparation, because preparation implies choice. It implies that outcomes are earned, not assigned. That realization threatens people who built their identity around waiting for the right time, the right sign, the right permission. Preparation doesn't wait. It assumes nothing is coming and builds anyway. That mindset separates people long before results appear, and by the time results are visible, the distance is already too wide to cross. People underestimate preparation because it's quiet. It doesn't complain. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't seek validation. It's repetitive, almost boring, and that's exactly why most people avoid it. They want growth that feels exciting, transformation that feels cinematic. Preparation feels dull, mechanical, thankless. But dull things compound. Small disciplined actions repeated without drama create momentum that looks unbelievable from the outside. When preparation finally shows itself, it exposes the lies people told themselves. The lie that they didn't have time. The lie that they were waiting for clarity. The lie that talent matters more than effort. Preparation reveals that clarity comes from action, not waiting. That confidence comes from familiarity, not affirmation. That talent without discipline collapses under pressure. These realizations sting, so people soften them by calling the outcome coincidence. Preparation also protects you from emotional chaos. When you've already faced discomfort deliberately, surprise loses its power. Opportunity doesn't overwhelm you because you've already imagined failure, success, rejection, and pressure in private. You've already rehearsed how to move, how to speak, how to decide. That preparedness looks unnatural to people who rely on impulse. They mistake control for luck, composure for chance. Coincidence is the story people tell themselves to stay comfortable. Preparation is the story they avoid because it demands accountability. If preparation matters, then neglect has consequences. If discipline works, then excuses fail. That is why people would rather believe in randomness than admit patterns exist. Preparation creates patterns. It turns chaos into predictability. It makes outcomes less surprising. And predictability scares people who depend on hope instead of habit. Preparation doesn't guarantee success, but it guarantees readiness. And readiness changes everything. When the moment arrives, you don't freeze, perform, or panic, you move. That movement feels unfair to those who waited for confidence to arrive first. They don't realize confidence is a byproduct of preparation, not a prerequisite. They don't realize the moment does. To create readiness, readiness creates the moment. People will always call it coincidence when preparation exposes the gap between effort and expectation. They'll say you were in the right place at the right time, ignoring that you made yourself capable of using that time. They'll say it happened fast, ignoring the years it took to make fast possible. They'll say it was unexpected, ignoring that you were expecting it. Enough to prepare for it. Preparation does argue with opinions. It does correct misunderstandings. It does need credit. It just keeps working quietly until the moment arrives and does what it was built to do. And when it does, the world reacts with disbelief, confusion, and convenient explanations, because accepting preparation as the cause would mean accepting that outcomes are not accidental, that discipline compounds, that effort matters, and that most missed opportunities weren't missed by chance, but by choice.